Good morning, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're doing very well today, and welcome to part 2 of the AMA. Part 1 was really fun. Of course, you should check that out if you have not yet. I know it's long, but we get into a lot of questions, and I think it was pretty fun, pretty interesting. But let's dive right into part 2 with a follow-up question from the donor. Thank you once again to Mr. Vladislav Yurenka for your generous support in this great idea. And to answer your other question, my friend, we'll start things off here. So, Vladislav wants to know only one thing I would ask, only one other thing. Other than MTG, time permitting, what else would you play? Video games, card games, board games, or nothing else? Really interests me. So, in general, I would definitely do a little bit more gaming. I like board games with friends. Certainly, I could get into most of the classics. Risk is fun. Most of those board games are fun for me in small doses. For another, and so are, more casual video games for that matter. I'm very out of the current video game loop. If I had all the time in the world, maybe that wouldn't be the case. Maybe I'd have a couple games I was really hyped about. The one thing I know, though, if time and money were both permitting, I would play Warhammer. I would definitely play some Warhammer Fantasy. I honestly don't know what happened to Warhammer Fantasy. I have not kept up on it for several years. I sold all my stuff a few years back, actually, to help fund Magic the Gathering, and because I just absolutely didn't have the time or the local scene or anything else. But Warhammer Fantasy, especially before they changed it to Age of Sigmar. I don't know what happened since then. Maybe they brought it back, something like that. Whatever. Not my wheelhouse, because I don't have the time anyway. But old-fashioned Warhammer Fantasy. My friends and I started playing when 5th edition was kind of in limbo. I think there was something called Ravening Hordes or Ravenous Hordes that was like a temporary holdover for how to build the armies and the rules for various armies going into 6th edition. And then 6th edition came out, and that was one of the very best times of my gaming life by far. 7th edition I remember being pretty cool too, and we played a ton of Warhammer back then. I was in, middle and high school maybe around the time that this was going down. You're looking at a Dark Elves army, looks like 6th edition to me. Awesome, awesome game. Really, really cool. If I again had the time and the money, Warhammer Fantasy for sure. Next, from Patreon, we have a couple questions submitted by Sasawi. Sasawi wants to know, what non-magic hobbies do you have, and is always curious if other folks enjoy MTG because there are similarities to other things they do, but without pressure and stress, or if MTG is a break, is something completely different. And for me, it used to be the former, and now it's the latter. So in other words, when I was younger and had a lot more free time, I did a wide variety of hobbies that had a lot of overlap. I just mentioned one of them, Warhammer Fantasy. Magic the Gathering has always been on and off a part of my life, and we would play other games, often similar genres. I would read books in that genre. I would enjoy video games in that genre. Always been a big fantasy nerd, and these days it is the opposite. These days I basically only have time for one such hobby. It is, of course, this one, and to the extent that I have other hobbies, they aren't really hobbies so much as kind of like obligations that I also happen to enjoy. An example of this is exercising. I don't eat as well as I should. I also don't work out as hard as I should, but I do work out consistently and I do enjoy it. I also, I can't really call it a hobby to raise my children and spend time with my family, but I do spend a lot of time doing that. To the exclusion of hobbies, basically, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I do love that. If I do have rare moments to do something hobbyistic that is not magic, I want it to be something totally different. Like, I want to chill out and just watch something, maybe shut my brain off a little bit, or maybe read a book, or in some way kind of break away from this, rather than the overlap that used to be the case for me. Sasawi also wants to know, what have you learned from playing MTG, as well as creating videos that have applied to real life? And, well, there's been a lot of things, because as my content may betray, I actually am not any kind of an expert with video editing or anything like that. I've kind of been learning as I go. So I have learned, some practical skills in these regards. Everything from making thumbnails to my speaking ability has improved along the way. We have also picked up some tricks here and there in terms of just computer stuff in general. And then as far as broader lessons that don't directly translate one for one, I have absolutely just had to develop a better work ethic, and that's a confluence of everything. It's my kids coming along, it's my job getting more difficult, it's my day-to-day responsibilities getting bigger as the channel is growing as well. Work ethic has been the big thing. I also kind of have to keep my mental state a certain way. You know what I mean? Like if I indulge myself a little bit too much with, maybe feeling sorry for myself or getting angry about things, that translates to my commentary here. I at least can definitely notice that. I'm sure many of you can as well. And therefore it reduces the content. So doing this channel has kind of made me a better person overall, kept me more honest, and kept me on the straight and narrow, I guess is a good way to put it. And more Patreon questions from Ricky Rankle. Number 1, do you see your own personality reflected in your preferred MtG color combinations? As in, for example, I play RB, but in real life I'd be more of a blue-white guy or what have you. Good question, and so I'm showing you Silver Quill Command because I think the answer is partially yes, partially no. Somebody on my Discord actually posted the What School Are You quiz recently for the new Strixhaven set. I took it, and I ended up getting Silver Quill. Sharp style, sharper wit, maybe the inverse, something like that. Anyway, I don't know how stylish I am, but sure, I'll take it. And in general, I think I am kind of a black-white personality, as opposed to maybe a black-green. I do love being outdoors, but I don't know exactly how green I am on the whole. I think I do have some traditionally black and traditionally white elements of my personality for sure, as those colors are reflected in MtG generally. I think I probably identify with those, but maybe we're Mardu, because I definitely have a bit of a red streak as well. So yeah, I think black-white, my primary color pairing, maybe with a red splash, and as much as I'd like to claim that I'm 100% Golgari, nothing else, I don't think that's quite as accurate as maybe Orzhov bleeding into Mardu a little bit. Number 2, what is your favorite Planeswalker, and what is your favorite artwork of that Planeswalker? Well, the second question a little redundant, because the answer to the first question is Liliana of the Veil. I could have chosen something different, just to be different, and just to have an art discussion, but I cannot betray Liliana. She is my favorite Planeswalker, and there is only one art, the amazing Steve Argyle art. However, there are a few different printings, and it's worth mentioning that the UMA box topper printing is totally gorgeous. A couple people on my Discord have those, and those are completely stunning. When I was foiling out Rock before I kinda had to sell it, I actually owned some very nice printings as well. The PTQ promo Liliana is totally gorgeous, absolutely incredible. So yeah, you can't go wrong with any Liliana, including, of course, the OG Innistrad printing, which is great too. And Steve Argyle's art is absolutely emblematic of the greatest, fairest, most well-designed Planeswalker of all time. 3. What is your favorite MtG artist and or artwork in general? I cannot exactly pick a favorite, but I do have several favorites that come to mind. I'm going to forget some as well. Feel free to list your own favorites below, but I'll just quickly scroll through some of the Scryfall searches for some of my favorites. First, we're looking at Rob Alexander, who I do love first and foremost for lands, right, and landscapes, but look at Fyndhorn Bow and Fyndhorn Druid for 2 examples of non-land cards that are totally incredible to me. Very understated style, very immersive, kind of high fantasy, old school vibes. Rob Alexander might actually be my favorite if I, gun to head, had to choose one. But we love everyone we're about to show you here. Rebecca Guay, a big favorite of mine. Very good with angelic or broadly ethereal themes. We see fairies, we see elves. She absolutely knocks it out of the park with these types of cards. I cannot speak highly enough of Rebecca Guay. Huge fan. She does suit these blue, white, and green colors mostly, but even her red and her black cards are absolutely beautiful. I cannot get enough of her. She is one of Magic's most iconic artists, if you ask me. I also love John Avon, and here with Avon, we do get more of a sense of the spectacular, right, than we do maybe with the previous 2 artists. We see things that are fraught with importance, if you ask me, and just very impressive visually, while also maybe not being over the top in the way that some some of the newer art can be. Cloudcrest Lake. I wish this card was playable. I love this whole cycle in Kamigawa, right? Just such cool stuff. But yeah, John Avon needs probably no further introduction or elaboration from myself. Huge fan of him. Here's a more underrated one, I feel. Tom Weinerstrand, or maybe Vannerstrand, I don't know how you say his name. But I first really noticed him because my only paper deck is Mono Red Prowess. I actually own Blood Moons from the Dark for it, which is completely incredible. That's like my most prized possession at this point, having sold all of my foil rock cards. And I noticed that Tom did the Blood Moon art and all kinds of other great art here, as well as the unglued mountains that I use for those. Let's see if Mountain by the same artist. Let's see if we can pull that up this way. Here it is. Yep. So we've got the synergy between the matching art for the basic mountains and the Blood Moon. You love to see it. And in general, I do love Vannerstrand's style here a great deal. Next up is Therese Nielsen. I know she's been canceled, okay? I can still like her art. We can separate the art from the artist, even if you feel, that it was justified that Wizards cut ties with her. I'm not here to discuss that. But in any case, you look at a card like Descendant's Path, and how can you not like this? Therese was very bold in terms of where she chose to take certain things, and just the execution is completely incredible. I feel very, very much immersed in specifically Magic the Gathering when I look at her stuff. It's inimitable. It's very, very good. Final one I'll mention is actually Cliff Nielsen, and he didn't do very many pieces, but to me, these are very unique. When I first kind of figured out and was looking at artists and figured out who this was, I realized that basically each of these cards had stood out in my mind without me putting together a pattern or realizing it. And again, this is a portfolio of only 10 cards, but this is an example of the type of uniqueness that is not as much there. Maybe it's still there, not as much there in modern Magic the Gathering art as it used to be back in the day. Number 4, how much do you bench, knowing you were doing these shoulder presses in one of your videos? Haha, yeah, I think it was a spoiler I was covering, and in between sets I was recording another segment, and I mentioned that there. So how much do I bench? I'm afraid not very much these days. I don't lift heavy, and I've never really had the genetics for bench press, or maybe the range of motion is more accurate. I've never felt that the bench press motion was that natural to me, and I'm talking about traditional barbell bench press. If you're using dumbbells or you're doing incline, that's always felt a little bit easier to me, and I've worked on shoulder flexibility in the past. My posture is pretty bad now, but back when I was lifting heavy, I was working on it. It still was never that great at bench press. I did put up 225 at one point. That's my heaviest max, 2 plates. Other lifts I had were more impressive, though. I did put up 205 as a seated shoulder press, which is actually pretty impressive. That's my best lift ever, and I won't ever get any stronger than that, I'm sure. And, I also have squatted 350, or no, I think I box squatted 350 and also deadlifted 350. Maybe we squatted something more like 325. It's been years now, I don't exactly remember, but yeah, bench press never been my strongest suit. Couple more YouTube questions next. From Mowards33, what was your first MTG set? I did answer this in the beginning video. That 4th edition mono black starter set. So technically 4th edition would have been my first set. I ended up also getting some cards from earlier sets, digging through the 5-cent bin at the store. As far as the first set that I actually bought a lot of packs for and opened a lot, I think it was Mirage. So however you want to define that, probably 4th edition is technically correct. Maybe Mirage was the first set I bought a lot of packs for back in the day as a kid. If you could bring one card from MTG history into Modern, which card would you choose? Right now, I would say Hymn to Torok. I've speculated on that in an MH2 video, and, if you haven't seen that, maybe go check that out for some more in-depth reasoning. But yeah, I love Depletion, all in on Depletion. We're going to hymn them out in Modern. And there is a leak that says him, among many other very powerful hold cards, is actually coming to Modern via MH2. So we'll see about that. Now, for the real question, is a hot dog a sandwich? I am going to say no. But you have to give some good reasoning. We have to reason from first principles and from logic, not just from a gut reaction. So let's look at a Google search for sandwich. I don't see any hot dogs, do you? That's a first red flag. And hey, maybe Google's biased. Maybe they're excluding hot dogs for reasons best known to them. But, look at these sandwiches and then look at these hot dogs, right? There is something different. I don't think you can reasonably call them the same species or even the same category specifically of food. However, why? Well, I thought about this, and actually to me, the big reason is if you take the inside of a hot dog, and you gotta disregard the condiments, although it doesn't undermine my argument, just, let's use the plain hot dog for the clearest example. You take the meat out of the hot dog, you can throw it up in the air, and you can catch it, and it doesn't fall to pieces, it doesn't make a mess, it is a whole thing. It's a singular entity, the hot dog. Whereas I think part of what defines a sandwich is that you have a lot of different entities comprising the meat, whether we're talking literally about the types of meat that are on there. Even if it's only one type of meat, it's still shredded or it's still in pieces. And if you talk about the innards in general, forget about it. A sandwich is almost like a salad in between two pieces of bread. That's one way to look at it. A hot dog is its own thing, so I have to say no. I don't know if that explanation is fully satisfactory, but maybe it's a unique angle to look at it from. Maybe I need a little bit of backup in the comments. If anyone agrees, let me know. If you disagree, let me know too. But no, I would say a hot dog, not a sandwich. Next is the best question I've ever seen from A Deadly Reality. Is why are you such a handsome man? A valid question. Yes, that is a valid question. I will allow it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I don't know how to answer that. I do take decent care of myself, and I guess if people think I'm handsome, I'm grateful for that. I guess I got a little lucky with the genetics, if that is the case. But the grass is always greener on the other side. We all wish maybe we had different traits than we do at times. But definitely, I think anybody can be handsome. I think anybody can be beautiful if you take care of yourself. So everybody's got their own traits that are going to be beneficial when maximized. So if you're a little bit down on your looks, think about what you have going for you genetically, what you have going for you as like your building blocks, and try to emphasize those strengths. If you're a little bit heavier set, maybe start lifting weights like we talked about earlier and get strong. If you have, really nice eyes, try to clean up the stuff around the eyes. Try to maybe get your hair in a style that emphasizes your eyes. I don't know. I'm not really into this type of thing, but I think the point here is that everybody can be good looking if they try, and a lot of that is psychological. So get your mindset right first, and the beauty will follow. Over to Discord, where Love says, comments on the reprint policy, not good enough. I don't know why they discontinued Modern Masters. Maybe you can tell me in the comments, but to me it was like kind of printing free money, right? It's printing free money for them in a certain way, and I think there's not really any particular reason not to reprint more aggressively than they do. On a related note, I am interested to see if we get many or even any MH1 reprints and MH2. That's one of the biggest things they need to do. The MH1 prices are out of control. I think they almost need to correct their own error by reprinting MH1 into MH2. And maybe that was always part of the plan for the Modern Horizons series, but given their track record, I don't know. So yeah, reprint policy, not good enough. They got to do better with aggressively reprinting high-value cards, if you ask me. Guy Catalan wants to know, what is that one fun card you wish you could play in Modern and have it be competitive? That would be my namesake, my friend. That would be Grim Flayer. Not that it's a disaster to play it, but in general, in just about any shell, it is going to be a little bit outclassed by other 2-drop threats. Of course, we think of Rock, and even in the 2-drop slot, we have Bob, Scooz, Goyf, and those in general are going to be better positioned than Grim Flayer. There is a world in which Grim Flayer is maybe more optimal than one of them if one of them is totally irrelevant, and that's definitely great, but there's usually not that meta. And also, I'll mention that it's totally fine to play Grim Flayer as a one-of in most of these lists. It's actually quite good, but I just wish the card was more competitive. I wish it was like, all right, we start out playing the Rock, or we start out playing any BGX deck, frankly, with a couple copies of Grim Flayer, if it was just a little bit more pushed, right? Because I love this card. There's a reason I chose it for my channel name. I think that it's very skill testing, very unique effect, giving a mid-range deck, a black-green deck card selection in a kind of unorthodox way is very cool. I like the way he feeds himself. I've always been delighted by the keyword trample on cards with low base stats. I think the vibe of the card itself is very spooky, very disturbing, very on point for Golgari. Absolutely love the card. Wish it was just that little bit stronger. Bobby wants to know, what takeaways, lessons learned, etc. would you say you've gained from the perspective of building and fostering a community, building engagement, ownership, culture, etc.? So I've talked a little bit about this. This is kind of overlapping with some earlier questions. So in addition to what I've said earlier in this series, I would say I have learned to trust people a little bit more. I am just completely blown away by the goodwill, the generosity, the expertise, the friendliness of people in general in my community. And, I think in a way I was maybe a little bit right to be skeptical because of the heights that would reach, just because we know that the Magic community can be a certain way in general, right? Let's just leave it there. Let's just put it that way. We've all been to FNMs, okay? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. But, when you have, a barrier to entry, which is what I do. I have a few barriers to entry, actually. First you have to seek out content on YouTube, perhaps when Twitch is at least as common these days, if not more common. Secondly, you have to be interested in the relatively niche stuff that I do. Thirdly, these people have all signed up for Patreon. So, when there are these barriers to entry, you will attract people who are broadly similar or broadly like-minded, or at least are broadly interested in helping you out. And when you have those structures in place, you can trust people, and I think that's amazing, and I think other people have learned to trust each other here too, because as I said earlier, we've had trades and sales and all kinds of awesome stuff go down, people just helping each other. It is truly incredible. The other thing that I will mention here is that it does help to just lend an ear. Just lending an ear to somebody. People need communication. People need contact, even if it's digital contact. A simple act of genuinely listening to somebody, giving them your genuine feedback, that can go a long, long way. People will develop loyalty to you, or they will be really grateful for that, and this is a good way to really help people. I myself am kind of a solitary person, and I have very little free time, so personally, when I get my free time in my solitude, I'm taking it. This project has helped me realize that not everybody's quite like that. A lot of people crave more contact. They're desperate for it. I have learned that. I have developed empathy for that, and I think I've gotten a little bit better at accommodating that, and indeed at recognizing that in others, even in my day-to-day life. We got 3 questions from Chuck, who says Junda's back on the menu. So true. The second one I've already answered. Do you think DRS could be safe for Modern? No, not really, but the very small tweaks to make it Deathrite Mystic is featured in the first video. That's how I would fix it, and I do think that would be safe. Third question, second, what card do you think will come off the ban list next and why? Very interesting question. And if we tab over to the Modern banned list, we have a few candidates. So remember, he's asking which one do I think will come off next, not which one should come off next. And if we're looking purely at what I think is most likely, I have a couple candidates. I think it is unlikely, although one of my first instincts is to say maybe they'll reverse the ban of Faithless Looting or Mox Opal. Thinking about that a little more, I just think that's a little bit unlikely. I think it is more likely outside of some new set totally breaking Modern in half, followed by a mass unbanning. I think it is more likely that they'll try something a little safer and or that hasn't really been tried in Modern, and to that end, Preordain is perhaps the most likely to be unbanned. The blue control decks are doing pretty well, but spell-based combo not so much in the meta. Preordain arguably helping spell-based combo out the most, followed by blue-based control, which again is doing pretty well, but maybe won't stay, is not terrorizing the format or anything, right? And Preordain, definitely not to be conflated with Ponder. Ponder should absolutely stay on the ban list. This card is completely insane if you ask me, and we'll see exactly how strong Abundant Harvest ends up being, right? That's another thing to consider. So maybe with Abundant Harvest imminent, they're not going to ban Preordain anytime soon, but if Harvest flops, maybe Preordain the most likely. I could also see Punishing Fire being relatively likely, just because I think the decks that can play this are relatively few, or that would want to play this are relatively few, and also I think Modern could absolutely absorb the power of Punishing Fire. That said, I don't want this to be unbanned, even though it would go into Jund. I don't want it to be unbanned. We really don't need to punish people more for playing fair, small creature, non-infinitely recursive strategies, right? Punishing Fire, just adding to Wrenn and 6, Plague Engineer, Lava Dart, and Fatal Push, and everything else is ways to hose those strategies. I'm not really in the market for that. Let's find a way to hose big mana or something like that, right? Those are probably the two most likely to come off. I could include Splinter Twin here just because I think there's been a lot of debate over it. But I think there have been several glaring windows in which unbanning Splinter Twin would have made sense over the past few years, and at each turn, Wizards has declined to do that, so I have to conclude that they're probably not looking to unban Twin anytime soon. Chuck's final question, what would Jund need to become tier 1 or 0? Well, if they actually unbanned the real Deathrite Shaman, that would make Jund tier 1 or 0, most likely. Also, Hymn to Torok would be great in Jund, probably better in Jund than in any other BGX deck, if that really does come into fruition with MH2, simply because Jund is already the highest kind of power level overall. Hymn to Torok just pushing that even more to its limits, and beyond that, the him getting the hand empty is going to make Kroxa better, and you also have Seasoned Pyromancer to turn your late game bad top decked hymns into gas. So Jund most able to mitigate the downsides, perhaps most able to capitalize on the upsides as well. I think that is also true for Rakdos, but Hymn to Torok, a very good tool for growing Tarmogoyf as well. So yeah, if Jund gets DRS, if Jund gets Hymn to Torok, or if Jund indeed just gets, perhaps more likely than either of those, a new pushed printing from MH2 or from a standard set, right? Warrior Dwarf asks, why do you think WotC prioritizes printing flashy threats rather than printing hyper-efficient removal or lock pieces? And this is part of the much maligned, and I believe correctly so, Fire Design strategy, where their internal data seems to show that newer players are more casual players, but especially newer players, they don't like their powerful threats getting killed. And they also don't like not being able to play, whether it be through Ensnaring Bridge, shutting off the attack phase, or from extreme land destruction, locking all their spells in their hand. Chalice of the Void, these prison elements are deemed unfun, and even 1-for-1 removal is deemed unfun. Newer players notoriously complain about the card Thoughtseize, and complain about discard in general. And don't get me wrong, we've all been there where the Thoughtseize just breaks your hand to pieces, and ooh, if only they didn't have that, right? But in general, enfranchised, experienced, good players really know that 1-for-1 removal, 1-for-1 interaction, whether it be permission, discard, or a kill spell, definitely part of what makes Magic great. But in an attempt to appeal to newer players and more casual players, they have trended more toward flashy threats. Can't fail threats, right? They'll draw a card, so it doesn't feel bad if it gets removed, or it's indeed immune to commonly played removal, stuff like that. So it's an attempt to appeal to newer players in the more casual market, in my view, at the expense of the health of the game. Lameboy Lucas with a few nice questions here. The first one, though, is a trick question. Who would win in a fight? 5 Dark Confidant-sized Tarmogoyfs or 1 Tarmogoyf-sized Dark Confidant? That's a trick question. You can't get me this time, my friend, because a Goyf can never be Bob-sized. It can never be a native 2-1. Trick question, not gonna fool me. Tough question to answer, though, so maybe that's my way of copping out of it. What things outside of Magic, he wants to know, do you really enjoy? I have talked about this a bit. Just to reiterate, it's family time. It's relaxing. I get very little relaxation time. I do enjoy exercising, too. Relatively straightforward, normal stuff, I guess. What is the card that makes you happiest and angriest? Well, the cards that make me the happiest are when the classic BG Rock cards function as intended, or indeed BGX. So, like, if you Bloodbraid into the absolute perfect Cascade, if you flip nothing but painless lands with Dark Confidant while being uncontested while your life total is low, if you are against an aggro deck and you totally take over the game with a gigantic Scavenging Ooze, those are the types of things that make me the happiest. It's when the mid-range cards function as intended. The card that makes me angriest is by far Veil of Summer, but really in general it's stuff that blows out 1-for-1 interaction. But Veil of Summer, definitely the biggest offender, but another card, Ephemerate, stuff like that, it's just those cards, they really do tilt me. Lucas also wants to know if you for real got to design a Magic card, what kind of ideas would you submit for it? I would focus strongly on making that Deathrite Mystic idea work. I think Deathrite Shaman is one of the coolest cards ever, and I truly do believe that that type of main deckable utility is exactly healthy for Modern and is just what mid-range wants. However, it is also a very fair card because it doesn't draw a card, it's not recursive, it can fail because it's a poor top deck, or it can just be traded with 1-for-1. That's perfect. I don't want to do anything besides make that fit in Modern. Whatever it takes, I would like to sit down with a panel of designers and start with a more basic toned-down version of DRS and take it from there. That would be my number one priority. From Roman Ronan, what is the most you've made from investing in one or more Magic cards, either intentionally or incidentally? These are mostly incidental stories, but I mentioned that 4th edition was my first set. Mirage was one of the sets that I bought a lot of packs of as a kid. I've kind of waxed and waned with Magic. The only other time I've bought like a critical mass of packs was Cold Snap. I was fascinated by Cold Snap. I think I was in high school when this came out, something like that. I would pick up a lot of Cold Snap singles. I would buy some Cold Snap packs. I just had a bunch of winter-themed decks before they became actually good, just playing at the kitchen table with my friends, and I always loved the card Mishra's Bauble. I ended up with a collection of baubles. I even then understood that like a 0-mana cantrip, even with the delays, even though I wasn't building around it much, was that good. And if you look at the price history, it was dirt cheap for a very long time. I ended up with a modest collection of them. I don't think I sold them at the literal peak, but pretty darn close. And I still have 4 copies of Cold Snap Bauble to my name. So yeah, that was definitely one big investment victory for me. That was more incidental, but also partially intentional. The other thing that comes to mind, I'm sure there are others, but this one is totally incidental. I was at a relatively local gaming store. I don't have one very close to me, but I ended up, just thinking, well, a lot of people play Commander, maybe I'll pick up a Precon. I picked up the Edgar Markov Precon. I think he sold it to me for $30, maybe $35, something like that, and Teferi's Protection was in there, and this is a $54 card now. I sold that relatively recently near this peak, and just basically made like, 15, 20 bucks and got an entire Precon besides this card for free, and there's some other decent cards in there as well. So yeah, Teferi's Protection, just a total free roll. It's always nice when stuff like that comes along, but I do have to say maybe it was just a tad intentional rather than purely incidental, because I glanced at this one and I was like, you know what? I think this is actually going to be some pretty decent value. Proved to be correct. So yeah, nothing too crazy, but I've never been much of an MTG finance guy, and I've been careful though. I've been careful. I've been modest with my purchases. I've thought them through, but I've never actively tried to make much money doing it. But a couple things will come your way if you do it for long enough, right? Roman also wants to know what, in your opinion, would need to be printed for the Rock to finally drop those Harmagoyfs. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it would be very strange if they printed another Scourge of the Skyclave style card anytime soon, and that's what we would need. We would need another Scourge of the Skyclave style beater that scales with something other than life loss, of course, right? Because Rock does not accommodate Scourge anywhere near as well as the red-based decks, as the Shadow decks, etc. So we would need some kind of another 2-drop beater that has no protection effects, no draw a card, etc., but has a very high ceiling at just the beatdown. And if it's not life loss and it's not based on the graveyard, I don't know exactly what would gate it or what would allow it to scale. Maybe if it somehow scaled with the lack of cards in players' hands, that could be an interesting design space, and that would arguably reward you just as much for playing the game. But realistically, even in that case, we'd probably play it alongside Goyf, right? Because they both want you to do the same thing. So I don't exactly know. Maybe we would need alternate win conditions. Maybe we would need to be rewarded for playing more of a control game and more of a removal-based game and win the game with Planeswalkers or something. That would be the only way I see dropping Goyfs. But even then, hard to fathom for me. I think we're stuck with Goyf, and I think it's a good thing. Rolov asks, what's the biggest moment of tilt you've ever had? I don't know if it's the most dramatic moment. I've had more dramatic moments of tilt, but one of the most comprehensive tilting experiences I've ever had. I've only played one MTGO challenge in my entire life. It was back in the Oko meta. I was on Rock, and I was 4-1, first ever challenge going into round 6, and had managed to dodge the Oko decks until then, and then we just run back-to-back into Oko decks, and their top decks were completely insane. Oko just X for wanting the Rock out of existence, and it was just such a crushing experience. And so I finished 4-3, snuck into getting published at 32nd place, at the lowest possible place you can achieve while still getting published. But man, if Oko was anything remotely fair for Modern, that could have been a very different story on my first and only ever challenge. And I do hope to play more challenges coming up in the future once my schedule lines up. But yeah, generally running into the Okos, running into the Uros, running into the Veils of Summer. You guys know the story. Guy Catalan wants to know, who is your favorite patron and why is it a Frenchman named Guy? Well, we do love our Frenchmen/Southern Americans. Definitely gotta love Guy Catalan, a wonderful guy. Honestly, I don't have a favorite patron. I'm not just saying that. They're constantly battling one another to the death for my favoritism, and if I just name one, that will be the end of that, and we can't have that. We must have blood spilling constantly in the Coliseum for the Grimflayer's approval. Now, kidding, really, I do love this community. It is just, I don't deserve it, frankly. It is such a blessing, so many cool people, but yeah, Guy Catlan, definitely up there, super cool guy. Another from Roman Ronan. What is the most prized card, or are the most prized cards in your collection? Well, I don't have much of a collection anymore. I mentioned earlier that I have the mono red prowess deck, and then just a small smattering of almost just junk rares, basically a couple nostalgic cards maybe that aren't worth anything, but I have sold out of most of my paper collection. So from mono red prowess, the dark printing Blood Moons are definitely the most prized cards in that collection in terms of being from the dark. I think is super cool. I love that set. They're also the most valuable. One relatively pricey rare I do still have kicking around is actually a foil Apocalypse set, Pernicious Deed, because I speculated on this back when I thought maybe there was a good chance they would print this into Modern and MH1, and it would have been pretty well positioned back then in the Rock too. I don't know exactly how good it would be these days. It's still retaining some value. I think I got it for cheaper than this. I think I got it on eBay for under the $60 that it currently is. If this ever is printed in Modern, of course, I expect that value to go through the roof. Either way, it's a cool, like, Rock card, right? Even though it's not cool in Modern, keeping that old school foil, old bordered Rock energy in my binder, such as it is. Warrior Dwarf says, what style of deck do you find egregious? I kind of answered this in the first one. It's the piles. It's the piles that don't interact in a way that is going to police most decks, whether it be the 5-color BS I played in my most recent league with Abzin, or the Yorion piles is the example I used before. That is the type of deck I find most egregious by far. Lameboy says, which of the BGX staple cards would you most like to have a beer and hang out with? Well, if I were single, it would be Liliana. If I needed advice, or perhaps to scheme for domination in some way, it would be Dark Confidant. And if I needed to bury a body, it would be Grimflayer. Love with some more questions. We'll start at the bottom here. Describe the card that WotC would feasibly print, which would make you quit Modern until it was banned. Honestly, they already did that. I would not have probably been playing at all. Or at least I would have taken a hefty break during the Oko meta and during the peak of the Uro meta if I didn't have the channel to kind of keep the momentum going with, to keep people involved, to fulfill my obligations for donation leagues. They already did it. I would have been out for a while, no doubt. And I don't think there's really anything that can realistically be worse than that for me, from my perspective, given the fact that Fire Design does seem to be trending down a little bit. And also, even if it was, I would still keep going as long as I had an audience. I would just probably complain more, right? Or find a way around it in some other way. How would you feel if the channel suddenly exploded in popularity and the community was continually flooded by an influx of new people? I would feel overwhelmed. I would feel grateful. I would feel happy, but I would also not know how I'm going to handle the obligations. I think the Discord itself polices itself really fine. I have wonderful moderators, a wonderful community as a whole. I wouldn't worry about that. I would worry about my end of things, keeping up with donation leagues and other requests and so forth. I would just have to do as best as I could, and I think I've maybe reformed my structure as many times as I reasonably can. So I would just have to say, well, this is a good problem to have. Let's buckle down and figure it out. How often do you believe modern playable and modern staple cards should be introduced to the format? Not anywhere near as often as they are. I love covering spoilers. I get just as excited about as anybody about them. I enjoy the coverage. I enjoy the hype it generates for my channel. And I do enjoy tinkering with new cards and assessing them and integrating them into existing lists that I already play. That said, when I signed up for Modern back in 2016 when I started exploring the formats, that's not how this was, right? That's not how this was at all. This was, it was the proverbial, couple handful of cards that are maybe going to see Modern play every now and then, something blows stuff up, but generally it was trickling in instead of flooding in, right? As far as the new Modern playables go, I would frankly much prefer a return to that, despite the fact that I kind of benefit from Modern having some upheaval, right? As a content creator, I still prefer a more stable, more steady, more predictable Modern format. What's the strangest post you've seen in the live stream chat that you didn't have any context for? Well, I'll have to go look. Let's go look real quick. I don't know, it was probably the time that I woke up to just 10,000 memes. I think the fellas were going a little bit ham. You never know what the kids are going to get up to when daddy is not home, right? So definitely all right with it, definitely some good stuff. But I mean, we are posting hundreds upon hundreds of memes, and I just have to wonder what precipitated all of this. But it's good times no matter what, right? Good times in the live chat at all times. And we're going to close out this video with some questions from Nostier. There are more questions. You're going to need to be on Patreon to see the answers to those. We're going to do part 3 in written form because I think these videos have gone on for very, very long. And also because that's a kind of a cool thing to write about, right, in my view. So several questions from Nostier. Some of them we've already answered. I already talked about my favorite food and drink. In general, I didn't mention this when we talked about drinks before. I drink very little that's not water or coffee. Black coffee is by far my favorite drink. I drink a ton of water too. I also do a weird thing in the mornings. I used to do it more when I was intermittent fasting. I no longer am able to do that in my new position. It's too demanding. I don't do as well with with my brain fasted, right? But weird drink I used to have is just cold water, a big mason jar full of it, with a little apple cider vinegar and a little lemon juice. Sounds disgusting. It's bitter. I don't mind bitter, though. And it's definitely just kind of a healthy cleansing drink. It's also an appetite suppressant. So I drink a lot of black coffee, a lot of water, and that. If you are trying to lose weight or just stay lean, don't drink your calories. That's the best thing I can do. I eat like a king. I eat like a beast, right? I eat pizza, tendies, chips, crackers all the time. I eat that stuff all the time. I eat burgers. I eat a high protein diet, but I also eat a good amount of junk food. And part of the reason I'm able to stay relatively lean is because I don't drink my calories. So that's not really what you asked, Nostier, but we already kind of covered what you asked. Allow me to go on a tangent. I also kind of mentioned the non-MTG hobbies earlier in this video. I would play Warhammer if I could, which ties into one of Nostier's other questions. But I already answered this one too. My favorite MTG pro is Reed Duke by far. I don't really follow that many other pros. The pro scene has not interested me all that much. If we get, some coverage again from Star City Games, I kind of like watching that. Maybe I'd get a little bit more into the pro scene that way, or the prominent paper player scene, right? But yeah, Reed Duke 1000% all the way. Let's deal with these three questions though. So, what are your opinions on the out-of-universe sets, Lord of the Rings, Warhammer? Those are perhaps my two singular favorite fantasy settings, even more than Magic the Gathering. I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan and a huge Warhammer fan. I don't really have high hopes for the crossovers. I'm gonna be honest. I think this whole kind of marvelization of everything where it's a crossover for this, and it just doesn't do it for me at all. Maybe I'm too old for it, right? Maybe this appeals to a younger demographic. It does not appeal to me. I think never the twain shall meet is a good kind of guideline, and maybe that's a little bit dogmatic, but in general, I don't have high hopes for these. We'll see, right? But are we really going to play like a Legolas card in a Modern Elves deck? I just don't know if I'm going to be feeling that. We'll see how they execute it, though, but my expectations are relatively low. Have you ever stopped playing for a long period of time? If yes, why did you stop and what made you come back? Yes, I have had several years off in between a year or two on throughout my entire life, up until I got back into it about 5 years ago. And that was simply because most of that time I was a kid or a young adult in my early 20s, and I just had other hobbies. We would just wax and wane with Magic with whatever friend group I was around at the time. So we would come back, and then we would stop playing for quite some time. No particular reason other than other things catching our interest. Final question, how do you deal with losing streaks in MTGO? How do you untilt yourself? Well, I'm not saying this to brag. I don't really go on losing streaks. I'm very good at maintaining 3 and 2s, and just a positive record overall. A single negative league tilts me, and therefore I guess it's lucky that I don't have as many losing streaks as perhaps I otherwise could. Otherwise, maybe I'd have to learn better untilting skills, right? The thing that tilts me is that if I'm only able to play 1 league or so a week with time constraints, and that ends up being a bad one. If it's a donation league, I feel an obligation to the donor to do well. It's just always tilting, right? So in terms of how I untilt myself, I would say normally take a break, do something else. I already have to do that, so I don't really have a choice. I don't have great advice other than to remind yourself that what you're doing is voluntary, what you're doing is fun, what you're doing is sometimes to the extent that it is in your control when you lose, it is a learning experience. Sometimes when it's not in your control, you kind of have to throw your hands up and say, well, there is nothing I could do about this. The other thing that I think is really important is try not to develop a negativity bias. A negativity bias is something in psychology where people kind of develop a mindset, well, why does the bad thing always happen to me? Why can't I catch a break? And it's usually not even close to true. Things do tend to kind of come out in the wash. They tend to even out over the course of time. And people have much, much bigger problems in life than going on losing streaks in MTGO. So try to keep the negativity bias at bay. Try to remain objective. And even if you objectively are having very bad luck, just know that it will pass and know that other things in your life can provide you joy and success as well, and you'll get back on that winning streak in no time. Thanks again for all the questions, my friends. I'm going to scroll down through the rest of the comments we've seen so far. I'm going to answer the rest of these on Patreon as well as any others that come in before I write the article or on YouTube for this video. So thank you once again for watching. Thank you to Vladislav Jurenka for the great idea, and I hope these AMAs were fun and enlightening. So thanks again. I'll see you guys soon for some gameplay. Talk to you then.